hear me. If you can't, just let us know in the comments and we'll see what we can do to improve the sound. Right, so sorry if there was a bit of delay and you were a bit worried that we weren't going live, but everything's up and running now and working okay. So today we're going to be talking about making a mould. That's going to be the main focus of today's subject. We're just going to give it another 5 minutes. I'll still keep talking to you just to give people a chance to join us. So in the meantime, I'll just get prepped with some personal protection before we get started. Okay, before we start, like I said, I'm going to get myself prepped with some personal protection. When you're dealing with resins and all the other chemicals that you're going to need to protect yourself. So first of all, I'm going to put a Tyvek suit on. It's got a plastic coating to stop any chemicals from getting through. It's really important that you protect your skin at all times. Okay, the other thing you need to protect is your eyes, especially when you're mixing the chemicals and anytime you're working with them with the fiberglass as well. So once I start mixing, I'll put these safety goggles on. When you buy any of the materials, if you go on the website, click on the product that you wish to use, scroll down, and as well as the technical data sheet, you'll also find a safety data sheet. Now this can be printed off our website as well. And the data sheet looks something like this. If you go to the correct section, which is section 8, this will tell you everything you need to know for your own health and safety when you're using the products. So on here we've got 3 symbols. One is eye protection, one is gloves, and the other one is to make sure you've got suitable ventilation or you've got respiratory equipment as well. So it says in here to provide adequate ventilation. We've got that in here. We've got huge extractor fans and we've got ventilation coming from different units here. And we're going to be using just a very small amount of fiberglass and resin here, so there's no need for me to have any breathing equipment on. But if I was in a confined space, I would need something like breathing apparatus with a tank to help me breathe, but I won't need it in this case. And yeah, so for eye protection wear splash-proof eye goggles, and for hand protection wear protective gloves. Make sure they are resistant to the chemicals that you're going to be using. So this is just a quick rundown of some health and safety before we start. So this is just a quick example of a respirator, and if you're using resins, the filters you need, it's got on here somewhere, is A2P filters, and also have a dust filter in there as well. Also, before you start, make sure that if you do get any products on your skin that you get washed off immediately, and if it gets in your eyes, that you have a source of eye wash as well. So we would recommend an eye station in every workshop. We sell those on our website as well. Right, so that's a health and safety talk finished with. Now we get on to the moulding process. So you've all come here to learn how to make a mould. So if you want to make a product out of fiberglass, so something like this, you're going to need a mould which is the opposite of the product that you want to make. So for that case we would need what's known as a female mould, and to make that mould you're going to need what's known as a plug, or some people call it a former. So here we are, this is a plug, and that plug has got to be the exact same shape, the same finish as the part you want to produce. So I'll just talk you through the plug. This one in particular, this one's made out of what's called cigar block, which is this stuff here. It's also been CNC machined into shape, so you would have several layers of this machined down into that shape, and then it's finished with a protective coating. Any imperfections are just filled with body filler. I don't know if you can see from the camera there, but you see some traces of white. That's the body filler just showing through. The grey is a product called Durabuild, which was painted over. This is just a resin based primer which is rubbed down to a very smooth and highly polished finish. So we get rid of that, we don't need that anymore. Now, can everybody hear me okay? Just let us know in the comments if you're struggling to hear us and I'll speak up. So we're not going to make anything that big today because it would take too long. So the mould we're going to make today is just going to be this size. But again, before we use any chemicals, make sure that your workshop is also at the correct temperature. I would say you need good working temperature, so have a thermometer handy. So room temperature we would recommend somewhere around about between 15 and 20 degrees. And which is also important as well as the workspace, make sure that your products are conditioned to temperature too. So that means have them in that room, I would say about 24 hours before you come to use them, because if the products are cold, it's going to affect the curing and the performance of the materials as well. So we've already mentioned the cigar block, CNC'd into shape, but you can also use other materials, materials such as timber. We use this quite a lot for our plugs and what have you to make moulds. So if you've got good carpentry skills, you can make a decent plug from it, and it's nice and solid as well. So it's a good idea that to have your former really made from a solid material. If you make it from a soft material, it's going to promote shrinkage in the part. It's not going to be very stable to hold the shape. As the materials cure, they tend to want to shrink a bit, so you want something nice and solid that's going to hold the shape until the resins and everything has gone through its full curing cycle. So like I said, this is an example. It's timber, it's then sealed with a varnish, like a shellac. We then go around with bits of filler, get rid of any imperfections. If there's any screw holes, we fill those with filler as well. Once that's ready, we then put the resin based primer on. It might not be showing up on the camera, but you can see some brush lines there. That's because we applied that with a brush, but you can apply it with a spray. All you need for that is the thinners to go with the Durabuild, so you thin it down no more than 7%, and that can be sprayed through one of these just standard kind of metal spray guns that you pick up for automotive spraying. But because it's a product that's activated with a catalyst, it's important to clean the gun out after every use as well. To do that, you just flush it through with acetone, and if possible strip the gun down and give all the parts an individual clean, and then reassemble it before the next use. So for today's tutorial, because we haven't got time to spend shaping timber or CNCing a block, what we're going to do, we're just going to use a simple material, and it's ideal for small projects, and it's just our PU foam block. We've got that in various thicknesses and sheet sizes. So to give you an idea how this works, it's dead easy to cut. It's just similar to the PU insulation that you get. And as you can see with this hacksaw blade, cuts dead easy. You can use an old kitchen knife, and it can be easily sanded as well. Now, if you're doing this on a large scale, make sure you've got a dust mask on and you don't want to be breathing this in, and it also holds a static charge as well, so make sure that you're well protected from the dust clinging to you. It's good to have an airline just to blow the dust off when you're finished. So that can be easily shaped. And here's a shape I made earlier, and this is the general shape we're going to go with throughout the course. It's quite a simple design, but like I said, that material is quite dusty, and it stays quite dusty on the surface, so it needs sealing first. Just take a bit of plastic sheet just to protect the bench. Pop that on there. And you can just use a general purpose resin to seal the PU foam. So gloves on before we start using the resin. Suitable eye protection. We've got 50 mils of resin there. I'm just going to do quite a fast mix on that, because we're not wetting out any material, so it's not going to have any thickness there to create its own exotherm. So we're just going to speed up the resin a little bit. I'm going to put about 2 mils in that. So the usual catalyst dosage is 2% whenever you're using polyester resins. So we've got about 4% in there just to speed things up. So again, just in case anybody's just joined us, we're just using PU foam as our former to make our mould, and because it's quite unstable and dusty, we're just going to seal it with some resin. Now, this particular resin starts off as a blue colour. When you catalyse it, it turns green, and as it starts to go through its curing stage, it sort of turns to a browny colour. And that happens with most of the polyester resins. Okay, so that's enough resin on there. The reason why I've done this on a sheet of plastic is because it'll easily release from the plastic. You don't want to be doing it on a old piece of cardboard and having that stuck to the resin. So I'll easily be able to remove that from there when we're finished. So we'll pop that off to one side. And here's one that's been done earlier. It's done nice and hard. It's no longer dusty. But the problem with this material is, if this was a slightly larger part that we were doing, especially with a flat surface, although the surface is now sealed, it wouldn't be quite hard enough to mould from. Once you start working with resins on top and start paddle rolling it, you'd probably crack that outer shell. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it a layer of fiberglass, let that cure off, and then we're going to use filler to then veer the shape back in again. I'm just going to use a lightweight chop strand mat for this. This is just a 300 gram chop strand. I'm just getting a new pot of resin to mix. I don't want to be using the old stuff because it's already started going through the curing stage. On something this small, and because I've used the resin quite quick, I could probably get away with it, but just to show you best practice, always start off with a new mix. So 100 grams of resin, I'm going to put 2% catalyst in there, which will be 2 mils. Now when you buy the products from us, you'll get your catalyst in a separate bottle. Any small amounts, such as 1 litre, you get little bottles like that. But if you're buying larger quantities, it's quite handy having one of these catalyst dispensers. You can fill those up with the catalyst by unscrewing the spout, pop it back on, and then when you squeeze it, just like I did earlier, it's got a little measurements on there. It tells you how many mils of catalyst you're squeezing up to. A really handy piece of kit. You got any questions yet, Nick?
No, somebody was just asking, was it epoxy or polyester, but then they answered their own question.
Ah, right, okay. Yes, it is polyester. You could use epoxy, but polyester is a lot more cost effective, so just use that unless you really have to use epoxy. In case anyone's curious, the materials we're using now, we're going to be using a tool and gel coat, a binder resin and a tool and resin, and as long as the mould's post cured and you use our polyester compatible gel coat, which is epoxy compatible but it is a polyester gel coat, you can produce carbon fibre parts from that as well. But we'll go further into that later on. So, before applying the fiberglass, we'll give this another coat of resin. I'll try and slow down a little bit. I'm quite aware that when we're doing something new like a live course, nerves start getting the better of us and I'll start rushing things through, so I'll try and slow down a bit so everyone can keep up. But the video will stay on our YouTube channel later, so you can watch it back. So, the chop strand mat. I'm just tearing this into small pieces, manageable sizes, and you'll notice I am tearing it, I'm not cutting it. The reason for that is so that the strands can knit together and you don't have huge massive overlaps and straight lines on the part, because if you have that it's just going to make it more difficult to fare it off with a filler. So chop strand mat, it's held together with a binder. It's an emulsion binder, and as you wet it out with the resin, that binder starts to break down and the fibres can then move into place. So when you initially wet the fibres out, there's not much use in standing there with one area trying to dab it down into place. Just coat it with the resin, move on to your next piece and just let that resin just do its work in breaking down the binder, and then you can come back and it'll be a lot easier to manoeuvre the fibres about and consolidate the fiberglass as well. On a larger project you wouldn't need to use such small pieces of fiberglass, but because it's quite a small project it's a bit fiddly, so we have to just tear small bits off at a time.
Embowning asks, am I right in saying polyester is more brittle than epoxy?
That is correct. It chips easier than epoxy. It's harder than epoxy to feel. It scratches easy than epoxy. Epoxy's more for if you need really good bonding properties to the resin. So when you're manufacturing something out of polyester, you've got the fiberglass in there as well. So the whole structure, the whole part made from fiberglass and polyester, it's kind of all one composite. So the fibers give it strength and the polyester holds the fibers together. Epoxy, however, that can be used on its own, so you can use it to coat timber to protect it without the need of fiberglass in there, because epoxy's got its own strength anyway. And it's great for gluing things together. Polyester it's a bit poor as a coating. If you did coat timber with it, after a while it would start to split and break away. And if you glued 2 bits of timber together with polyester, you could quite easily break them apart. Whereas epoxy, if you glue 2 bits of timber together, then try and break it apart, for example, say sheets of ply, you'll find that the ply would break before the actual resin. Again, epoxy you would use on woven fabrics. You wouldn't use it with chopped strand. One, because it doesn't break down the binder, although you can get powder bound mats for epoxy, but they're still not as easy to wet out as woven fabrics. But because it's got really good bonding properties, it bonds those smooth fabrics together really well. Polyester wouldn't. If you for example, you bonded layers of woven fabric together and it came under stress, you would find those layers would start to peel apart. So when you're applying fiberglass as well, it's a good idea to have a paddle roller. Just a metal ribbed roller, and just use that to flatten all the fibres down, consolidate any layers if you're putting multiple layers on, and to get rid of any air pockets as well. Right, okay, so assuming that's all done, we'll move on to the next stage. So again, here's one that was done earlier. The fiberglass is cured off. Just to recap, just for the purpose of the video, we're using polyurethane foam that's easy to carve. We're having to seal it to stabilise it and cover it in fiberglass to give it some strength on the surface. If you were using solid materials like timber and CNC block, you wouldn't have to go through all this, but because a lot of our customers are, you might just be working from home in a garage, you haven't got all the facilities for CNC block or the CNC machinery, and if you're not skilled with timber, this is quite an easy material to use. So this is why we've chose this one today. So now we've got our shape, we're going to fare it off with some body filler. This is EC42. It's an easy sanding body filler, similar to automotive fillers out there, but the one we sell is a lot more cost effective than what you can get in Halfords or somewhere.
Steve Hallis says, now it's got a layer of glass on, it's now a slightly bigger plug. How can you control the size?
Now, yeah, you're going to be adding about 1/2 mil to 1 mil. You know, once you start fairing it off and everything. So you might have to think about that when you're shaping this. It's probably not the best material. Like I say, we're using this material because it's quite quick. It's simple to use. So you've got to think about that depending on what you're making. If you're making something that has to be to spec, down to a few mils tolerance, you might be better off looking at more professional materials. But it depends on the project as well that you're doing. If, for example, you were making a simple box shape, you may not need to make a plug. You can use melamine faced chipboard at MDF to build a box structure, and then you can fill up the corners with plasticine, put gel coats and fiberglass into that, and that becomes your mould. And then you just unscrew it and take it apart, which is something I'm going to discuss later on in the video, because we're going to create a flange around this, which is going to be constructed from melamine board. So I'll show you that working as well. So your choices of material also depends on what it is you're going to make and how tolerant it is to size.
One more quick one before you move on. This is relevant to what you're doing now. Dave says, how long can you leave the plug between coats of fiberglass?
To get full hardness, it's best left overnight. If you were putting more layers of fiberglass on, you could leave it until it cures to a stage where it's hard enough to sand, maybe after say 4 hours or so. But it's best to leave it overnight to cure to go full hardness, especially if you're going to be sanding it and working it. So any product you get, it's a good idea to give it a good mix first. I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but you can see some separation there. The resin's just starting to part away from the filler that's in here. So we're just going to give that a mix up. It's a good idea to do this to gel coats, floor coats, any other compounds as well. Always give it a pre-mix before you then start decanting it and using it. Okay, so we're going to take approximately a golf ball sized dollop of the fillet to around about a pea size hardener. Now we're just going to mix that up just by folding it, easy for me to say, folding it in on itself. And as you mix it, you should get a uniform pink colour to that. Always interesting to see how far and wide our audience is. So you can just drop us a comment, just let us know where you're from. Just because we're nosy. Okay. So take a spreader. I'm sure everybody knows how to use body filler anyway, but All this is doing is just filling in between the fibres because there's a texture there from the fiberglass. So give it a skim over. Okay, so you get a general idea. You can see the high spots where the fibres are. You can see those kind of strands showing up a lot more now as the fillers filled the low points in between the fibre. So we're going to leave that set. Obviously we would normally cover the whole thing, but we'll move on to the next stage now. And that is to fare it off. So here's a model I did earlier. You can see the body filler. And it's just a simple case of just sanding it back until you've got a smoother surface. So this one here is all done. And so now we have to seal it. Now you could potentially mould from that, but it's not advised because you might have strands of fibres that have been sanded through, which may then start to grab some of the materials or start to soak in some of your release agents. So it's always a good idea to seal it. By sealing it with a resin based primer, it also fills all those scratches as well. So the product we use for that is Durable Surface Primer. As I mentioned before, it's a good idea to mix all the products first before you use them. To make this primer easy to sand, it does contain a filler which sometimes settles on the bottom. So as well as just shaking it, when you take the lid off, give it a good mix as well. Just feel around with the mixing stick, make sure nothing's on the bottom there. Don't know if you were all there for the beginning of the video, but you can spray this. You can thin it down with durable thinners, no more than 7%. And when you thin it down, you can get it to more of a spray paint consistency, and you can spray it through one of those guns. That'll give you a much better finish, especially if you're doing a big plug for, say, like an automotive panel. It'll give you a nice even coat, and you just build up the layers till you're confident enough you can rub it down without going all the way through. If you do go all the way through, it's not a great big problem. You just sand it, give it another coat. But if you do use these kind of guns, make sure that you do flush them through with acetone, and then maybe strip them down and clean them as well.
Where everyone's from.
Yeah.
Doncaster, Yorkshire, Shropshire, Edinburgh, Bristol. There's about 17 people watching.
Nobody overseas yet?
Nobody overseas yet. Embalming says they use micro balloons with epoxy and get great results.
Yeah, it makes a brilliant filler, especially if you're using epoxy. Because I don't think there's many epoxy based fillers ready made out there. So if you are using epoxy, then yeah, adding powders is great. There's a big range out there for different purposes, for thickening or to make an easy sand filler, and things like microspheres, glass bubbles, they can be mixed with polyesters as well to make a filler. So Durabuild, it's a resin based primer, so it does take the same catalyst. Okay, so as I said, you can spray the product, but for the purpose of this we're just going to apply it by brush. It's got quite a low viscosity, so it gets right in all the scratch marks in there.
Steve missed the start. Can you explain the different resins and why you choose them?
I'll go through that along the way. Go through it again. But mainly for this video we're using polyesters. For the main reason is it's more cost effective than epoxy. Epoxy is quite expensive, and for most cases if you're making a mould, you don't really need to go to the expensive epoxy or vinyl esters or anything like that. Polyester is absolutely fine. So materials we've used so far, we've used general purpose resin to seal the foam. Just to let you know, just for the purpose of the video and because it's easier to use, we're using polyurethane foam block, which is easy to sand by hand. The downside of that is the surface is quite unstable, so you have to seal it with resin with a layer of fiberglass and then fare it off. And at the moment we're just going through the Durabuild stage, just so we've got a surface that we can rub back with wet and dry papers and polish up to a good shine. And Durabuild is again a styrene based resin primer, quite similar to polyester resin, which is styrene based also. So what we do is we'd let that dry. Depending on your temperatures and the dosage of catalyst you've put in the Durabuild, you'd probably be ready to give it another coat after say half an hour to an hour. As soon as it's touch dry, you can give it another coat. No need to sand between coats or anything. And once you've got a good thickness on there, start rubbing it back with wet and dry paper. The downside to applying it by a brush, you've got all those brush lines you then have to rub back. If you used the spray gun, thinned it down and sprayed it, you wouldn't have that problem. All you would have is a very slight orange peel that you would have to rub back, which is a lot easier than rubbing away brush lines. So again, following the same kind of pattern, I'll give everyone that we've done earlier. So here's one all dry. It's got multiple layers of Durabuild on it. You have fresh pair of gloves. To be honest, you don't really need gloves for this stage, but just to keep my hands clean, I'm just putting them on. So we're going to go through the grades of wet and dry paper.
After the second coat, could you sand once dry or leave overnight to cure first?
Leave it overnight to cure if you're confident that one coat is enough to rub back. But if you want to add more layers just to build up the coat, you can literally, as soon as it's cured off, give the other coat. You don't have to wait overnight or anything.
Saying, do you have to? Can you sand it once it's dried, or is it better to leave it overnight before you
Oh,
sand
sorry. Yes, definitely leave it overnight. If you rub it back just after it's cured, it's more likely to gum the paper up. So it is best to leave to go overnight to fully harden. So wet and dry. I'm sure everybody knows how to use it. Dip it in some water and then start rubbing back. I'm just going to concentrate on one area. So we're using 240 grit. This is just to get most of the brush lines down. So we'll go for an 800 now, I think. And then finish with a 12 or a 1500 grit. Now I can just see ever so slightly I'm starting to just go through to the resin. Now going through to the resin's not a problem at all, as long as you don't go back all the way through to the fiberglass and the foam. I think that'll do for the cutting back. I'll just grab some polishing compound. So Nick can just grab us a select. There's a select there, is it? What we got?
Finish. Stage 2.
Stage 2 will do.
What?
Let's go for them all, sort of thing.
That's UV wax.
So just grab some polishing compound. This is the finish one. Now if this was a larger project, we'd be using a polishing machine. I'm just going to see what we've got. The profile finish for this one.
Okay, right. Trucker Daddy says, my marine grade resin's always a little bit sticky after it cures until I start the gel coat. That's weird because you couldn't start with the gel coat first. What can I use? Wax to get the resin to cure hard.
Right, it depends. It depends what you're doing with it, really, because resins and gel coats do tend to cure with a tack finish. Some resins will cure okay, depending on the moisture content in the air and the temperature. Gel coats, however, they always stay tacky unless they've got wax applied to them, which is a wax and styrene, often known as MW. But it's important to know that once you put that wax in, you can't put another polyester product on top of it. It'll just prevent the chemical bond between the two materials. Now there's a lot of arguments I've seen on forums where they say, well, you know, as long as you sand it back you can recoat it. You can, but I've also seen products which have been thoroughly sanded back of the old flow coat, reapplied, and then after a few extreme seasons, cold weather, hot weather, and this contraction, expansion, you start to see those that new top coat start to peel away. So it depends on what you're doing, but I would probably only put the wax in the very last layer, usually in your gel coat, to convert it to what's known as a flow coat, or some people refer to it as a top coat. But we do have those ready-made, so you can buy gel coats and flow coats separately. But if you let us know a little bit more about why you're doing that, I might come up with another solution for you. At a guess, I'm guessing you're finishing your boat with it. Right, so I've used the finish, and you can see there's quite a good shine on that. That's just to give you an idea how to get the best possible finish. Let's have a little bit of a clean up here and we'll move on to the next stage. Questions, anything while I'm cleaning up?
Just comments, really. People can read them themselves, can't they?
Right, so before we move on to the next stage, I'll have a quick recap on what we've done, just in case anybody's joined us a little bit late. So in this video, we're showing you how to make a fiberglass mould. And as I explained, before you make a mould, you need what's known as a plug or a former, which is the exact shape of the part that you want to make. So different materials that you can use is CNC block. We've got a product known as Seeker block, which can go through a CNC machine and be easily shaped. The other products are the likes of timber. So if we make a shape out of wood, that's a good stable product. It's solid. You then just fair off some areas with a bit body filler after you've sealed it with a varnish. Once all that's sorted out, you can then put the Durabuild surface primer, which I've not long finished applying to our plug that we've made. But for the purposes of the video, because it would take too long to make something out of timber or something out of CNC block, we're just using polyurethane block all the way through this video, simply because it's dead easy to shape. The only drawback is it's not a very hard, stable product like this, so it normally needs a layer of fiberglass, which we've done. We've given it a hard shell, fade it off with filler, and then Durabuild it. So next stage, So to make this mould, we've just finished doing our plug and getting that ready. But what I normally find is a good idea on moulds is to have a kind of a flange on it as well. This stabilises the shape and it gives you a surface to kind of work and lever against if you want to pop the parts out. And it's also excellent shape if you're going to do carbon fibre parts, especially if you want to do resin infusion with carbon fibre, because this area here gives you somewhere to put all your vacuum bagging paraphernalia and your low temperature sealant tapes that you would need for vacuum bagging. So from our plug, we're going to then show you how to make this area here. And for that, it's just as simple as melamine faced chipboard or melamine faced MDF. Why melamine face? Because fiberglass releases really well from this material. All you normally need is just a little light wax. You don't need, you know, loads of coats of release agent. So here we've constructed a box. So it creates this area here. And we're just going to prep that, and then we're going to mount our former in there. So as you can see, that's already the opposite shape to that, so you get a general idea there. Don't need these gloves for a while. Okay, so we're going to mount this on there. If that was wood, we could usually just screw it on there from the back. It's important to screw from the reverse so that you've got access to the screws to take it out again. If it was CNC block, you could use a bonding paste just to bond it in place. For this, we're just going to use a spray glue. It's quite a light material, so a spray glue will do for that. 3M77. I'll just let that tack off. It's a contact adhesive, so you spray both parts, let it tack off, and then pop them together. So while we're waiting for that, we're just going to seal this chipboard edge, because if you get any resin in there, it's going to destroy your former, which if you protect it, you can use it again. So we're just going to use some flash tape for this, or you can just use normal household sellotape. Flash tape it's got a good adhesive to it, and resin releases off it really well as well. How are we doing for sound?
Sound seems fine.
Yeah.
We've done an hour already.
Oh. Okay, that should have tagged off by now. Right on the former you'll see these corners just in between the melamine board, and we've also got the corners here around the former. We're just going to create a fillet around there. Two things you can use is wax. This is just a block of pelican nacryplast, it's known as. Tooling wax. Or you can simply just use plasticine, just the pure white version without any colouring in it, so it doesn't come out on the mould. So to create the fillet, just see if I can get the right angle. Can you see that corner okay?
Yep.
No. Just needs a little bit more adhesive on there, I think.
Turn that round. Let's see what's on it.
Yeah, so we're just going to do that corner there. So just push the wax or the plasticine into the corner. And then take what's known as a fillet ball. It's got two different size radiuses on there. And you just use that tool to push that down. Now these fillet bars come in different sizes, with different size radiuses. So what that does is it gives a nice curve to that area, and we'll do that around the former as well. So that just basically just it gives it a nice curve instead of a sharp corner, because it's important to realise that fiberglass doesn't really like sharp tight corners, and if you do produce a mould with those corners, chances are it's going to start to chip and degrade over time. So it's a good idea to incorporate some curves into the design. It also stops the resin from and the other materials from leaking underneath the former and down any gaps. So we're going to do the same around the former. So we're going to go all the way around there, but you don't have to watch me doing that because we've got one we made earlier. Here we go. That's all done there. And we've also got a release agent on this. And the release agent we've got on there is just this stuff here, PVA release agent. Again, that can be sprayed. You don't need to thin this product down, especially if you don't try and thin it down. But you really need good breathing apparatus and good ventilation if you're going to be spraying this stuff, and the same with the Durabuild. If you spray with it, you get a much better finish on your plug. And we're going to use blue gloss here. That's the kind of PVA. We've got different types. We've got matte finish, and we've also got clear. I prefer the blue because you can see where you're applying it, and the gloss because most parts that are made usually have a gloss finish. So I'm just going to grab that former we were working on earlier just to demonstrate the PVA. I'll get it more in shot for the camera there. Just raise it up a bit. Oh, nearly forgot. Before you use the product, give it a good shake. Also, if the bottle's been used before, just be careful just to peel some of the excess PV off there, because it'll only cause lumps in your mix. There's no need to activate this with anything, just straight from the bottle. And because I'm not spraying it, I'm going to use this foam brush, sometimes nicknamed Jenny brushes, and they're great for getting a smooth finish. Now before I start that, just as a good tip, just degrease the surface, especially if you've been using the wax as a fillet. You'll probably leave little kind of waxy, greasy fingerprints on the former, and if you do that and go on with the PV will just split on the surface. So we're just going to use acetone. So acetone just to degrease the surface. Just dampen the cloth. Give it a wipe over. I would stay clear of any other solvents, any that might leave traces of other chemicals or films behind, because it might interfere with your resin based materials. So acetone is always a good choice, and it evaporates quite quickly as well. You can see that's already evaporated away, and we can go straight on with the release agent. You see off that one coat we've already got good coverage and a good shine from the PVA release agent. And what we do is we let that dry, and it dries quite quick. You can actually speed it up with a bit of heat. And once it's dry, load the brush with some more PVA, and then when you go on with the subsequent coats, be quite quick. You don't want to be dissolving that first layer. So I would put about 3 or 4 coats of that on there, and then I'll be confident that it's got a good skin. Make sure you get right in the corners as well. So going back to this one, you can see it's got good coverage on there. If I wanted to, I could, grab a corner and peel that off. But obviously I don't want to do that. But that would demonstrate, it's got a good thickness, good layer on there after 4 coats. So the next stage is to apply gel coat. So now we're getting right into the kind of nitty gritty of making the mould. Your first layer for your mould is your gel coat.
You want sugar in it?
Yeah, no, good. Sweet enough. Right. Gel coat. This is 15 PA, and it comes in a already coloured green. We do have in a clear, but to be honest, it's good to get it already pigmented. That way you don't risk over pigmenting it. If you over pigment a clear tool and gel, you can weaken the structure of the gel coat. So if you can, just live with a green, even if you don't like the colour, because it's already pigmented and your tool and gel will have good strength. It's a vinyl ester based gel coat, so that's why after we apply the gel coat we'll be applying an isophthalic resin with a lightweight mat as a binding layer for the polyester resin to bond to this product. So we've already got some measured out. We've got about 250 mils there. So 2, 4. We'll put 10 mils of catalyst in there to give her the 2%. Again, as I mentioned earlier, make sure you've got good working temperatures when you're making a mould. Sometimes if it's cold, you can get fast reactivity resins, faster hardeners to compensate for the cold weather, which is great for doing parts or if you're sheathing something. But anything as important as a mould, you need to make sure that the temperatures are at a good level so that the materials are stable. Especially if you're going to be paying, say, you know, hundreds of pounds or thousands of pounds for the manufacture of mould. If you're paying all that money out on materials, you don't want it to be going wrong. One of the pitfalls of working in an area that's quite cold is that every layer you put on top takes longer to cure. And if it takes longer to cure, the solvents in the resins can start eating through to the gel coat. And then when you pop your mould out, you get all these little crinkles everywhere. I've got an example here. It's just known as kind of pickling of the gel coat. And it's basically just exactly what it does. The resin takes too long to cure off because of the cold temperatures, and you get these little kind of little crinkle lines on there. It's actually kind of normal case, that's the most severe case on there. Also, if your gel coat doesn't cure properly and it's quite soft, I don't think the camera can pick it out, but you sometimes get the strands shown through the part as well. So you need to make sure your gel coat's nice and hard before you start laying it up. Give it a good mix, scrape it off the sides as well, make sure there's no uncatalyzed gel coat in there. I'm going to pop that on there. Now what we don't want to be doing is treating this like a paint. We want to be layering it on. If you treat it like a paint and start doing this with it, you're going to end up with thin areas. And if your gel coat's too thin, it'll have that effect of pickling the gel as well, because it'll be too soft. It'll not have enough thickness to the layer to create its own exotherm, which it needs to cure properly. So we want to be applying it round about 0.6 of a mil thick, which you get that just by kind of spreading it on rather than painting it on. You don't need to be neat with this layer. Remember, the finish is on the other side, so you don't really need a high finish on this side. It's going to be covered with fiberglass.
What's the ideal temperature for polyester resins and gel coats?
I would say between 15-20 degrees, because you can go the other way. If it starts to get too hot, you're going to have everything curing off on you. So definitely not below 10 degrees. You can still get materials to go off below those temperatures, but it affects the performance, and that's when you're going to start potentially having issues. So yeah, around about 15-20 degrees.
And John says he's got some gel coat not used, it's pigmented, it's 3 months old. Does he need to put it on a paint shaker to mix it up, or will stirring be fine?
Stirring should be fine, depending on the size of the tin. If it's a, say, 5 kilo gallon size tin, big stick, plenty of muscle, just give it a good mix. If you've got a big 25 litre pail though, get one of those paddle mixers and give it a good agitation. I tend to find that most suppliers, and like ourselves, will give the materials 3 months. It usually comes in with 5 to 6 months from the manufacturer, but as a distributor it's fair to give it 3 months. But I've had materials that I've used at home. I've had them lying around my garage for 8 months to a year, and they're still being okay. But I would always say once it gets past 6 months, take a batch out, test it, make sure it's still curing okay before you start using it on an important project. But if you've got tooling materials, make sure you've got those pretty much in date, because mould making is always more expensive than manufacturing a part. So I'm just going round again, checking there's no huge runs of gel coat. Okay, everything's on there quite nicely. So decent finish to then start fiberglassing onto. So we're going to leave that to cure, or at least until it kind of tacks off. It wants to be at a cure stage where it's got a slight tack, although tooling gel sometimes does cure without a tack, but you should be able to run your fingers across it without any colour coming off on your fingertips, and that'll be a good indication that you're ready to go to the next stage. You can just leave it to be sure. You can just leave it overnight, but it's a good idea to get your first layer on the same day if you can. So maybe put the gel coat on in the morning and put the first layer on in the afternoon, and then leave that overnight before you put the rest of the layers on. So here's one that's been gel coated before, it's all cured off. So I've just got a couple of strands of mat on there, sorry about that, just stuck to it. Just clean those off. This was gel coated this morning, it's all gone off. It's got a slight tack to it, but no colour is coming off on my fingers. Check the corners, the deepest areas are where it takes the longest to cure. If you've got an airline or a piece of cardboard just to fan it out, it's always a good idea. The reason the lower areas of the mould take so long to cure off is because the product contains styrene solvent. Styrene's heavier than air, and it's sometimes the vapours just lie in the bottom of the mould. So sometimes you need to blow it out, or just tip the whole thing upside down once it starts to cure, and that'll just get rid of the styrene and help the deep parts of the mould cure quicker. So we're going to put the first layer on. Got the mat ready, which is just a 300 gram chop strand mat. The resin we're going to use is 491 PA. It's an isotholic polyester resin, and that bonds really well to the vinyl ester based gel coat. The other reason we're going to just do one layer is we want that one layer to cure off. We want to get the fiberglass fully consolidated, we want to get all the air out, and we want that to cure off so that when we put the other layers on to beef the mould out, all the actions that we're using are not disturbing that first layer and pushing air in. We want to be confident that that first layer has good consolidation of the gel coat. That's your critical layer. So I'm going to measure out the resin here. The glass to resin ratio is known as 2.5 to 1. So for every kilo of mat, you're going to need 2.5 kilos of resin to wet that mat out. Now, it's done in kilos because the fiberglass is sold by weight. So I just mentioned before that this is a 300 gram chop strand mat. We do 450 gram, 600 gram, 900 gram, and even lesser weights than 300 gram also. The 300 gram is referenced to the mat's weight per square meter. So typically, if you buy mat by the kilo, every kilo of 300 gram mat's going to be about, I guess, 3.3 square meters in there. So one way to work out how much resin you're going to need would be to measure out your fiberglass, have it cut to size, pop it on the scales, whatever result you get, times that by 2.5. That'll give you a rough idea how much resin you need in grams. I always find add a little bit extra because everybody's different. Every laminator will use a different amount of resin, and it generally doesn't always work out textbook, so always allow a little bit extra or be prepared to mix more resin. So I'm just going to guess how much I need for this. The joys of working with a material for so many years, you can normally kind of guesstimate how much you're going to need by looking at it. I'll go for 150 grams. %2 catalyst. That'll be 2 mils for every 100 mil or 100 grams of resin for the catalyst dosage. Again, give it a good mix.
Did you say what weight mat you were using there?
It's 300 gram chop strand mat, so it's 300 grams per square meter. So if we were doing a square meter of that mat, we'd probably need about 750 grams of resin for the 2.5:1 ratio. Just to go back to when I applied the gel coat, you might have noticed I was using a white plastic handled brush. These are good quality brushes for gel coating, and I would always recommend these if you're applying gel coat. There's a lot less bristle loss in these brushes because you don't want bristles in your gel coat. However, putting the mat on, we're just going to use these cheap wooden handle brushes. More economical, and you just throw them away after use. You can still clean them out, but the bristles aren't as stable. So, like we were doing before with fiberglass and the former, for this we're going to give it a coat of resin first. I'm just going to tear off pieces of that and wet these out as we go. You notice I've just pulled off all the straight edges of that mat there and just put them along the top here. Just makes it a bit tidier when you're fiberglassing. You have a lot less to trim off the edge then. So while I'm wetting this out, I'll actually talk a bit about trimming fiberglass. If you're going to trim cured fiberglass, it's best to use diamond tip tools. You can use a hacksaw, but your blades won't last as long. So if you've got an air compressor, use pneumatic diamond tip tools. Or if you're lucky enough to catch it at the right stage, as the resin starts to cure, it goes to what's usually referred to as the green stage, where it's hard enough to sand, but it's soft enough to actually cut through with a sharp Stanley blade. So you can usually just run a Stanley blade along an edge and actually cut the fiberglass. And then when you pop it out the mould, all you have to do then is simply just sand the edge. Hopefully you can all hear us. If you can't, just tell us to speak up. I won't take any offence. Sometimes when I am doing something and I look down, I do start to kind of end up talking to myself rather than the crowd, so just tell us to speak up if I have to. Just to mention again, in case you weren't here at the beginning when I was fiberglassing the plug, you'll notice I'm tearing the mat, I'm not cutting it. I want to try and avoid any straight edges that are going to cause too much of an overlap. I want everything to kind of blend in. And when you're wetting out the fiberglass, use more of a dabbing motion than a kind of painting motion. If you dab it, you'll wet the fiberglass without disturbing it too much, and that will make the part a lot stronger. If you start brushing it, you're going to kind of break up the strands, and you're just kind of going to destroy the structure of the chopped strand as well. If you're doing a big mould, certainly wouldn't expect you to do it with a small brush, you can use nylon rollers. We'll then leave the brush for all the detailed areas. So I've just gone round and I've quickly wet out the fiberglass. I haven't spent too much time on one area trying to kind of work it in, and you know, while the resin's breaking down the binder. I've coated the whole thing. The resin is now starting to break the binder of the chopped strand. And now just go around and start working it some more and getting it to form into all those corners and form the shape. I'll just tilt that up so you might be able to see it better. Let's just see if I can pick that corner up a bit. So there's a load of air in that corner there. I can just see the air behind the fiberglass. I'm just going to just dab that out. Okay, now for further consolidation, I'm going to use a paddle roller. This is just a metal ribbed aluminium roller. I'm just going to go over all the flat areas, working out all the air. You've probably noticed behind us there's other moulds. This is a working Fiberglass factory. It's our sister company, and we've been doing fiberglass moulds and mouldings for well over well, the last time we said I think it was 35 years on the website. It's probably gone up now, is it?
66 started.
66. Yeah. Yeah, so it's been around quite a long time.
54 years.
Yeah, sorry, it was East Coast that's been around for
Right.
30 odd years. Yeah, the production side of it's been around a lot longer. So the reason why I'm mentioning that is just to let you know that the materials we sell are materials we use. So any advice we give you, it's all expert advice. And we don't sell anything we wouldn't use here. Right, so that's a paddle rolling doing. Now we'll do the corners using a radius roller, or corner roller if you prefer. Just go around there, around every single corner. And then get rid of any excess resin. Just go around those corners again with a brush, just to flatten down any disturbed fibres. You see I'm just mopping up any excess resin as I go. The reason I'm doing that, I don't want any areas to be resin rich, because that will cause weak areas on the surface of the mould as well. You just want a good balance between it being wet enough to see through the fibres and to bind the fiberglass to the gel coat as well. Okay, so that should do for that stage. Not a bad guess. Okay, so we're going to be doing pretty much the same for the next stage. We normally leave that overnight to cure. Once it's cured, we give the surface a light sand, vacuum away any fibres or dust, and then wipe it down with acetone, and then that's ready for the next stage, which is pretty much the same kind of scenario there. You're just wetting out the fiberglass with the resin, but you're using a different resin this time, which is tooling resin, in particular Cristic 4010 PA tooling resin. And with this we're going to be putting 5 layers on. Now, usual rule of thumb with fiberglassing, you don't exceed 3 layers because you don't want to get the fiberglass to start getting too hot during its exotherm. So you would normally do 2-3 layers, let it cure off, then build on more layers. But with the tooling resin, however, it's different. With this you put all 5 layers on, and it needs that exotherm build up to help the resin to prevent it from shrinking so much. So it's kind of creating its own kind of post cure. If you were going to do carbon fibre parts then from the mould, you would then most likely post cure it further in an oven over a certain period of time. You would have to check the technical data sheet for that timing on post curing. But if you're not doing carbon fibre mould, your mould's pretty much ready to take off the former a couple of days after you've made the mould. But if you were using general purpose resin for this to make a mould, you would have to leave that on the former a good week or two, and there'll still be a chance that there could be some shrinkage. But this is a great resin to use if you don't want shrinkage in your panel. Right, when the layer cures, it's going to have a few strands sticking up here and there. They're quite sharp, these, like tiny little splinters. So take a glove just to protect the hands before you start sanding. And most importantly, dust mask. It doesn't need a heavy sand, you just want to denib it. Get rid of the dust. And dampen a cloth with some acetone and give it a wipe down. Okay, so the reason we've sanded it is to get rid of any splinters of fibres. The reason we want to do that is because when we put the next layer of mat on, if there's anything hard sticking up, like little fibres, no matter how much you roll it, you're going to have an air pocket that you're never going to be able to get rid of. So make sure you've got a nice flat surface to then apply the fiberglass to. This time we're going to use heavier mat. This is 450 gram. So 300 gram for your first layer, 450 gram for your next 5 layers with the tooling resin. Alright. Gloves on again. Any more questions, Nick? Or?
No, not really, I don't think. We had a discussion earlier on about what could you put on resin to seal it from the air, if you wanted to do that for some reason. And somebody said they used PVA.
Yeah, now it's not a thing I've tried. I don't think anybody else here has tried the PVA. I have seen it on a lot of American videos where they've used PVA release agent. I've always been wary of it in case it affected the cure of the product, but I have heard about people using that. I tend to just use a bit of wax in there, or depending on the project I might seal it off with a bit of cling film if it's say a cast of resin or something. But yeah, usually MW wax is enough to seal it from the air. But again, I mentioned this earlier to somebody else who asked the question, you can't really bond to a resin or a gel coat that's got wax in it, not successfully anyway, for kind of any kind of longevity. We've actually had a video on our channel somewhere about reflow coating, and it shows you some products where it's starting to peel off. Right. So again, 4010 Cristic RTR tooling resin, that's what we're going to use for these layers. Similar to the Durabuild, and basically I would say any product that you get from us, give it a pre-mix before you use it. So I've got some decanted in a bucket here. We've pre-mixed it before we then measure it out to use. I think we're going to go for 400 mils. And 2% hardener in there. I wonder if this is the longest live video. Nearly 2 hours now. It's a Scorsese movie.
The Irishman makes a mould.
So again, resin first. This has got kind of a light cream colour to start with, and like most of the resins, they'll go through a colour change as they start to cure. This will turn from a light cream to a darker cream, and then near enough like a very light brown colour. Once you've used it for a while, you can usually tell by that colour how long you've actually got to work with it, as it starts to get darker. So when you work with resin, because it's catalysed, there's a chemical reaction going on there, and that chemical reaction can start to cause an increase in temperature in the product. As it increases temperature, it starts to cure faster, just like if you were working in a hot area, it would cure the resin faster. And as it cures faster, it gets hotter, and you've got that chain reaction starting. So you've got, depending on the size of mix and your working temperature, you've got a decent amount of time to work with it, but once it starts to react and go, you need to keep an eye on it and make sure that you've got all your mat consolidated and paddle rolled out, get all the air out before you then go off and do another mix. If you need another mix, what you don't want to be doing is getting so far, going off, mixing another batch to come back and find everything gone off and you haven't actually got the fibres flattened down. So you'll see as I'm doing it, I wouldn't say it's slapdash, but I'm not sparing the horses and getting the resin on there and getting it flattened down.
What resin did you use for the first coat?
That was 491 PA isophthalic resin, and that's the isophthalic resin bonds really well to the tooling gel, which is 15 PA, which is vinyl ester based. So you need that resin to get a good bond to that gel coat. Think of it as like a primer. Going back to what I was saying there as well about the resin starting to cure, it's starting to get hot. If you've got a big lump of resin like that in your pot and you've left it to one side, it's going to start generating heat and it's going to start smoking. That smoke can be toxic, so if you've got a big pot of resin that left over, stick it outside. And if it starts to turn into jelly, just top it up with some water as well. That'll keep it. That'll cool it back down. You certainly don't want it next to you while it's generating heat. See, as I'm wetting it out, I'm not spending ages on that area I've just wet out, I'm just moving on to the next area and wetting that out. I'm giving that time to break down the binder, the styrene and the resin. I'll start loosening off the mat and making it more pliable. And that usually starts to happen after, say, around about 30 seconds or so. It starts to break the binder down. I would say after, say, 60 seconds it really loosens the fibres and you can work it a lot easier than standing there for ages while it's breaking it down, trying to flatten everything into the corners or round areas. If you find out that the resin's a bit too fast for you, you can do a few things. You can reduce the amount of catalyst, but it's always best to try and work at 2%. So the next thing to do would be to reduce the amount that you're mixing at any one time. So if you've mixed up, say, 2.5 litres of the stuff, just go for a litre next time and get it all consolidated down and then mix up another batch. Okay, so that's our first layer on, and we need to paddle roll it. And you want to be doing this for each layer. Once you paddle roll the whole thing, go around with the corner roller, get all those corners flattened down. And as you paddle roll, and try and keep a kind of a uniform process to it. You don't want to be paddle rolling over here, paddle rolling over there, back here, and end up missing an area. So start off with the former first. That's your most important bit. You don't want any air there. Go on all the sides in a uniform motion. So from this I would work my way from the top and work the air down to the sides, and then from there I'll do this area, working the air, any air over there, and then up the top as well. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you by putting all 5 layers on. You know, that's the first layer. You do every other layer exactly the same. So 5 layers all together. And I'll show you the next stage. So, gloves on for this stage. Okay, so this has been in here for I'd say about 3 or 4 days now. It's fully cured. We're going to start now dismantling the former and then taking the main former out the centre as well, and that should leave us with our mould here. So just go around, take the screws out. Just as I was saying earlier, melamine faced MDF or melamine faced chipboard, as long as it's got the melamine facing on, is great for moulding from if you're doing flat sheets or straightforward square boxes. And as you can see, it easily peels away from there. Any further questions, Nick?
I don't think is. No.
Okay, you can see the wax, you can reuse it again, you just scrape it off and ball it all up for next time. So we've got the former here in the centre, that just needs removing. I'm going to use some plastic wedges. And we're just going to go all the way around the outside to release it. Now we've got the advantage here that we've used PU foam, so we can kind of get on there and kind of squash the foam as we're prizing it out. If it was something solid like a piece of timber, the way they usually get it out, and because I can't demonstrate, I hope I can explain this quite well, is you would usually have a few anchor points, so maybe some brackets screwed on there, and then you would have, say, 2 blocks on the side here, piece of angle line across, then you would hook a G-clamp there and tighten it onto that bar, and that would usually kind of prise it up, and then you just tap it from behind, but not too hard, just a gentle tap all the way around on the outside with a rubber mallet. Just try and free that away, and as you go keep tightening it a little bit further until it releases. Now I keep nearly making the mistake and pushing that scraper down there. I don't want to be doing that. You don't want anything metal or sharp down the side there. Plastic wedges are ideal. If you go online and look at our wedges, they come in different colours, and the colours indicate the different kind of hardness of the wedges. So the pink ones are quite soft, which is they're kind of great for this, for knocking down. They kind of bend slightly to the shape. Now that's fully released now. I just need to try and grab it somehow. There we go. So that's a former out. Usually your former becomes damaged, especially around the edges. Been quite lucky with this one, just a little bit of a repair. We could actually use that again. This is the second time I've used this one. So it's still been a good material to use as a former. But if I was doing anything bigger, let's say if I was doing a roof for a camper van, I would certainly want something more solid than polyurethane foam. The reason being is because of a big huge area, even if you fiberglass it, it's still going to compress in the centre. So if you start rubbing it back and using a polishing machine on there, it's going to start kind of compressing, and you're going to end up with kind of a wavy line going over the flat area. So if you're going to be doing something big like that, timber's probably the best bet. And maybe it's a mixture of timber and body filler if you want to get some shape to it. If you're not that good with wood, there's plenty of pattern makers out there who might be able to do the actual plug for you. So that's basically it, and you can see there's a nice shiny finish on there with the PVA release agent. But if you look really closely, you might see just slight little lines off using the brush. And even if you spray it, you might get some slight little imperfections, little runs here and there. But all you have to do there, 1200 or 1500 grit wet and dry, just go over the surface, and then use the polishing compound like what I used before. So then after you've done that stage, you've got it all cleaned up, you've got it all polished, you should end up with your mould similar to this. Now I could polish that even more of a shine, which I think I'll do now, just to demonstrate.
Storing resin, says Mould. He keeps his indoors at room temperature. Is that the best way to store it?
Probably not if you're going to store it long term. You want a cool place away from direct sunlight, so something like a cool garage. Epoxies are slightly different. Sometimes if you store epoxies outdoors, it doesn't even take a freezing temperature to turn them into a solid. It's not a big deal, you just heat it back up again and melt the crystals down the resin. But polyester, it really needs a cool, dark place. You'd probably get away with it at room temperature to a certain point, but it will reduce the shelf life a lot more if it's kept warm. But certainly have it at room temperature before use. It just really depends how quick you're using the resin. There's quite a good surface finish on there to start with. I think it's just dulled from the amount of time I've used the release wax, because the release wax can have a bit of an abrasive quality to it. So finishing compound. You see the surface comes back up to a shine, just if you can see that area there. Don't know how well it shows up on the camera.
Pretty good.
Yep. Right, so I'm going to go through the waxing stage next. Quickly go off and grab a tin of wax. The product I'm using here is TR104. It's high temp wax. It was fine, and to be honest, I've used TR104 for new mould as well, but we mostly recommend TR108.
Can you use T-cut?
You can use T-cut. Years ago when I first started in the factory here, we used to use T-cut a lot. The only downside to T-cut is it's designed for car paint rather than hard gel coats, and if you buff too much with T-cut you can actually burn the surface, which was a common thing back in the factory that I was aware of during the 90s. If you polish it too hard, it would just burn the actual the gel coat, which in a sense is a plastic. But the things like Fibreglass and what we're switching to now, a range known as Raw, they're actually designed for hard gel coats. They're a bit more abrasive than T-cut, and the cut through gel coats a lot faster. But at a push, yeah, you can use T-cut. Just be very careful with it. So let's pretend this is a new mould. It's the one that we've just released. First of all, you'll need to condition it ready for your first ever lift from the mould. Now, one wax won't do it. You need more than several waxes. We normally say play it safe, go to double figures, so about 10 waxes. As you're waxing it, just use a Sharpie marker somewhere and just keep a count on the side of the mould how many waxes you're giving it. So just a bit of wax on the sponge. Make sure you touch everywhere on the mould, every part of the surface, even these flange areas. All the way around. Take a clean cloth. I would also use a cotton cloth. And then give it a good buff. After you've buffed it, leave it 30 to 40 minutes, another wax, and repeat that process till you've got, I would say, be safe, use 10 waxes. That'll create a good film on there. It'll reduce the chance of any linking between the polymers and the resin, and stop any, when you start making parts from it, it'll stop bits of gel coat sticking on your mould, or worst case scenario, the whole thing sticking in the mould. And what I would always say, just especially if you're doing a huge mould, an expensive mould, is do a test skin. Over the wax, just give it a very light coat of that PVA release agent, just a smear. It doesn't matter if it splits on the surface. You're going to do a sacrificial lift, and that sacrificial lift will just be a thin layer of gel coat. Let that go off, and then say a 300 gram mat. Leave about inch gaps every foot or so between the layers of mat. And once it's gone off, then just rip those out and peel it out. The reason why it says leave gaps is because if it does stick anywhere, you can get the majority of it peeled out, and you've only got a small area to repair if the worst happens and it does stick to the mould. It's always a good rule of thumb. We do that all the time just to make sure that the mould's okay. We don't want to be doing, say, a 5mm thick panel from a mould that may not have been waxed properly by another user, and find that we've lost say £500 worth of material on a big mould. So it's always worth doing that test skin. Once you've got the test skin out, wash it down with just soapy water, and then lukewarm water, just pure water. Give it another wax, I'll say 2 waxes. Then after your first proper lift, you should only have to wax it every 2 or 3 lifts, depending on the shape. The more complex the shape, the more times I would say wax it. So if you've got loads of kind of angles and kind of ribs in the shape of it, I would wax it every second lift. If it's reasonably flat shape, simple shape, every kind of 3 lifts, sometimes 4. But the more lifts you try and get out of one wax, the less life you're going to get out your mould. So try and keep it waxed if you can. So that's basically it on how to make a mould. Hopefully that's helped you. When you come to doing your parts, there's a massive range of colours that we do. So for example, your more cost-effective colours are ones that we have pre-mixed. We've got kind of grey, white, and then move on to your pigmented colours. black, yellow, reds, blues. So pretty much, I've got one here somewhere. Pretty much every RAL colour really. We do have a colour chart somewhere. Oh, thanks Nick. So we've got these colour charts, usually online. We do pretty much every colour that's in there. We can sometimes get colours matched. So if you've got a boat and you've got a piece chipped out of it, you can send us a sample. We can have it scanned. I would say it's not as accurate as paint scanners, but it's pretty close. It's, you know, if it's a really hard colour to get hold of, and if it's not in the RAL book. But yeah, we can supply most colours. Top tip: if you're doing light colours, it's a good idea. You've noticed the resins I use are quite clear. If you're doing, say, a light colour like yellow, use a yellow gel coat, but also use a yellow pigment in your resin as well, like that. Otherwise, what tends to happen is the darkness from the resin starts to show through light colours. So if you're doing whites, yellows, always pigment the backing layers as well. You tend to get away with it with black and what have you, but still, even with black, if light shines through there, you can sometimes see the kind of brush lines, and it makes the part look cheap. So by pigmenting your resin, it's always a good tip when you're manufacturing parts. So hopefully we've covered, well, I think we have covered everything there, just about. I don't know if there's any final questions before we go.
I don't think so. You can hang on a second if you like. So
Yeah, it's alright. I'll do a bit cleaning up, so if anyone's got any questions.
Questions, Mark?
No. Well, I think we'll call that a day then, and we'll try and think of another course. It's gone better than expected. Hopefully everybody could hear us okay. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.